Well, we talked in the video before about how to hopefully sell your articles, but there are a lot of ways to screw up this process as well. So let's look at some ways not to sell your articles. So you probably will not sell your article if you do not read the publication. I know I've said this before, and I will say it again. If you do not have intimate familiarity with this publication, the chances of you selling to it are extremely limited. If you address the queries incorrectly to the wrong editor, to an editor who's left, you're going to have a very difficult time selling that story. If you don't show the editor why you're the right person to read this story without, being incredibly big-headed about it, like, hey, I'm just the world's greatest writer, you're going to have a really hard time selling the story, especially as a young writer. You need to show why you are the right person for this story. If you pitch a story that's very general, that doesn't have a specific focus to it, that your theme hasn't been developed, you're going to have a hard time selling that story. Don't pester editors. If you send a letter, don't call them 2 days later and say, hey, I sent a letter. I'll call you 2 days later. And then you call them 2 days later and they're, did you get my letter? Hey, I'd like to talk about my letter. Editors are very busy. Editors do not want to be contacted by you on a regular basis. If it says no phone calls, don't make a phone call. You need to make sure that you are respectful of their time and the fact that the chances of selling to them are much less significant than you may wish they are. And so to a degree, it's a waiting game with a lot of editors. Editors honestly do not need to know a lot of information. They don't need to know if you submitted it somewhere else before and they rejected it. That's not relevant, and it's really not going to help you. They really don't need to know what anyone else thought of this piece. If your mom liked it or you got an A on it from in your class, it's not of concern to them. All they care about is, does it fit their magazine? They don't care how long you've worked on this piece. I slaved for 2 years over this thing. Well, that isn't going to help your argument at all. So, it's important that you give it the best foot forward that you can, present the best idea in the best way possible, and be as focused and simplistic about it as possible. I don't want to know how thrilled you are to be published in my magazine or how much you love my magazine and you've always dreamed of being published in my magazine. That reeks of being a fanboy, and that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a qualified writer. I'm unfortunately not very concerned with how much you think you should be paid for the article. I have a certain budget as an editor, and I pay a certain amount of money as an editor, and it's not up to you to set that amount of money. The more respected that you get as a writer and the more accomplished you are as a writer, you can negotiate money to a degree, you can negotiate some expenses, but for the most part, writers are kind of beholden to editors and the magazine in terms of what they're paid. The same way about the rights that you're going to sell. We've looked a little bit about magazine rights, and magazines buy what magazines buy. So you can negotiate to a degree. If they buy first-time North American rights and then they want to buy web rights, you can see if you can get more money for that. But if they're a magazine that buys all rights, they're going to buy all rights. And if they're a magazine that buys serial rights, that's going to be beneficial to you. But you have to kind of identify that before you ever pitch the story. You can't pitch the story and write it for them and then they say, oh, we buy all rights, and you're like, oh, I don't agree with that. By then it's too late. Please don't try cute attention-getting devices. I did once have someone send me perfume. I didn't keep it. It would have been lovely had I been able to, but it did not in any way entice me to want to get them to write for my magazine. I'm really not interested in your opinion of my magazine. I don't want you to tell me, this is an article that you should have been running years ago. You really should be focusing more on these types of stories. That's not going to help you. It's going to be annoying. Don't name drop. Be very careful before you mention that you know someone or, someone recommended that you write for this magazine, because you're really not sure what the relationship is with that editor and that person. So be very certain that when you put that information out there, it's beneficial to you. Don't ask for a meeting for the most part. That's not to say not all editors will meet with you, and some in smaller publications. I certainly expect that many of them would, but a lot of editors are too busy to meet with you. And so what they really want to know is, what's your idea and why are you the right person to write it? And if I want to meet with you at a later point, then I'm going to certainly be open for that. And threats are difficult, and I know that that sounds unreasonable. Who would ever make a threat? But I can tell you that I have had writers who've submitted a story to me, and then if I'm on the fence about it, I'm like, well, let me see how it might fit with our book. Then they'll send me another email, and they'll say, look, if you don't publish this story by next month, I'm going to take this to another magazine. And I will be the first one to say, do not let the door hit you on the way out. I had someone who once, threatened, tried to get more money for an article that he'd submitted to me, and then he threatened to take it away to another magazine. And I told him he was welcome to have it back, and of course he didn't sell it to that magazine either. And he never wrote for my magazine again. So you have to be really, really careful when you're in those kind of negotiations. And don't waste your time on an unreceptive editor. If you keep submitting story ideas to this editor and they keep saying they're not interested or they don't respond to you, there's 1,000 other magazines in the world. Move on. Look for somebody who might be willing to work with you. Make sure you're submitting in the correct way. There's some magazines who will only take written queries and regular mail. Some will only take email. Some want you to fill out a submission form. Do it the right way. Paste your query into the body of your email. As I mentioned, email filters will sometimes kick out attachments, so that could be a challenge. Don't use emoticons. I'm not really interested in if you're happy or winking at me or whatever you want to do. Punctuation should be very simplistic. Exclamation points for the most part are not your friends. Neither are capital letters. And try to be punchy in the subject line. Entice me to want to read your email. Don't put query letter in there. Give me some reason that I'm going to want to click on you. So this is kind of how not to write a query letter. Now, this is a real query letter that I received, and I'm just giving you a little bit of it here. I've never written to an editor before, but I have a wonderful idea about horses. I started writing since I was a child, so I thought I could write an article for your magazine. I haven't read your magazine, but a friend suggested I should write to you. This is the absolute worst way to start this. And you may notice they spell my name wrong. I mean, this is a real letter that I've changed some facets of, and I haven't given you the whole thing because it kind of went off into nothingness. But, this is the fastest way to turn off an editor. And once you've turned off an editor once, you don't really get the chance to make another impression.